Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Today we're having another episode with somebody I'm excited to talk with. We've got none other than Professor Kees van der Pijl. He is a Dutch political scientist and leading figure in the critical tradition of international relations, among other things, a former professor at the University of Sussex and a key voice for the Neo-Gramscian Amsterdam School. Wonderful to have you. How's it going?
Yeah, great. Well, it's hot here. Uh,
Yeah.
no, I'm working hard on a number of projects, and the current one is one of 25 years of 9/11
Interesting. Right.
next year.
And this is probably has a lot to do with Israel, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. Yeah,
I'm afraid so.
yeah,
If you don't know, our professor here was very controversial in his claims that the Israelis were involved in 9/11. But of course, the main motivating factor for the attacks was, in fact, the treatment of Palestinians, according to the 2002 letter to America by Osama bin Laden. So either way, whether uh, directly or indirectly, there's a lot to uncover there. Um,
yeah.
when is this supposed to come out?
Well, I'm still working on it,
Okay.
and it. What is very important here is even Mossad is it's often praised as an all-powerful organization, but they only have around 1,000 employees, so they may also have all kind of informal agents, etc. But you can once you delve into what happened on 9/11, you realize that this was such a vast operation with so many aspects, covering so many fields of the whole security apparatus, the American civil airline industry, aspects of that. With 1,000 people in your service, you can't organize that all from a distance. So a lot has to be ascribed to United States officials. Uh, don't forget that uh, on the day of 9/11, 15 major exercises were being held, were in progress. And that meant that tens of thousands of people were, in good faith, performing roles that belonged to the scenarios of these exercises. Unwittingly, they also participated in a criminal twist that was given to these exercises, and that was the um, well. It's difficult to you can't say too much with in inverted commas, but for instance, there were exercises about planes flying into buildings. But the problem is that the buildings, there were actually never any planes flying into buildings because the openings in the towers were too small to let in the type of plane that they claimed went in there. So, but basically, um, my approach is the one that I also used in the case of the downing of flight MH17, on which I published the book in 2017. That was Malaysia Airlines flight MH17, which was shot down over eastern Ukraine. And usually it helps when you approach these incidents not not in a too conspiratorial way, but as moments in a larger configuration of forces. It's like tectonic plates moving. So there was a brewing conflict at the time, talking about Eastern Ukraine. There was a brewing conflict between NATO and Russia, and there were energy issues. There were all kinds of issues. There was a seizure of power organized by the United States and Ukrainian nationalists. So, and all these things came together, and a friend of mine came up with the title Prism of Disaster. So, the downing of MH17 was a prism and that if you look through it, you saw all these lines coming together. And that's also how I look at 9/11. So basically, it cost me a lot of energy to focus on the towers and what hit the Pentagon, because in most cases nothing hit. There were simply explosions, and these were all very targeted. And it's very interesting to see who were involved in setting these targets.
Yeah.
But the context is what is most interesting.
Yeah, when traditional types of evidence aren't available, and you have where interests and motivations can converge, then you have a substantial amount of evidence to say, "Oh, this raises some eyebrows. This is."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It
Right.
seems to me that
And making pertinent claims is usually not helpful.
right, right. But we've known what is very popular now is the idea that on both sides of the political aisle, that nothing the government does has ever been or will be trustworthy. That everything is
Yeah, no, that also helps as a starting point.
right. And this is at least we're at this point where hopefully this is right before Rome kind of crumbles and turns into something different. But
Yeah.
but this has been the playbook the entire time.
Yeah.
So let's get into these questions. I have 6 questions for you today, and I want to see
Yeah.
how if you can answer them. You have an incredible body of work. It's unparalleled. You're one of the top-rated academics that was in my pile of other academics, and your name came up first. Across your work, you trace the arc of transnational power from colonialism to neoliberalism, and now to what we have today, the digital control. So what forces do you believe are shaping the current phase of global governance, and who's really steering this ship? Who's got their hands on the wheel?
Yeah. Well, actually, global governance was a sort of a phenomenon of an interval. Um, it was the form of international administration.
Oh,
Decision by those entrusted with global governance to change the government of a particular country. Now that only worked uh, as an uncontested principle, almost uncontested principle, in the 30 years between the collapse of the Soviet Union and the incursion of Russia into Ukraine. Uh, because that ended the period of global governance. Because in 2022, you could no longer say that there was a single center, a single consent, the Washington consensus when it comes to economics, that sort of thing. Um, so in these 30 years, there was global governance, and the best example is basically the COVID emergency, the lockdowns, which ideally would have been followed by all countries in the world organized in the World Health Organization. After the COVID pandemic, which of course in most cases wasn't even an epidemic, and the application of genetically engineered so-called vaccines, I would say the period of global governance came to an end. So today we are looking at a situation that has since developed, and that is a rupture in which rival elites fight each other. And there's no point in saying that some are better than the other. Basically, they all share a concern to keep their populations under control. But they are rivals. They are no longer part of a single administrative, world embracing system that you could imagine existed, for instance, after 9/11, when the whole world seemed to agree that Islamic terrorism was an urgent danger that had to be met, just as there was a almost universal consent when it came to the COVID emergency. Today, doesn't exist any longer. So today we are looking at rival elites, and the West and all that it stands for is declining. Well, I'm not revealing any secrets here. And the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, meanwhile reinforced with Iran, Indonesia, and a number of other very important countries. They are on the rise. But of course, they don't have the organic historical interconnections among each other that the English-speaking West had from the late 17th century. Because in the late 17th century, the Atlantic economy began to form. The migration highway between the British Isles and North America became a civil, a high road of civilization. Of course, not for the millions of Black Africans who were packed into slave ships, etc. But they were not part of the high road of civilization. Although, if you think about it, I've always been a great jazz lover. The development of modern jazz in Africa, in North America, sorry, is a unique civilizational event. But that's part of another project that I'm working on. In the 1960s, when everything radicalized, many jazz players in North America said we have to go back to Africa and connect to our roots, and they brought this is a bit of a side road. They went back to Africa, and to their dismay, found that the Africans weren't very much interested in that music, because African music, African popular music, is happy.
Right.
The Africans, for all the misery that exists in the continent, is an optimistic, life-loving culture. Fela Kuti, for instance, in Nigeria, with his orchestra of 30 female singers, with
Yeah.
all of whom he had relations. Whereas the jazz lovers, of the jazz players, expressed the misery of the slaves separated from their homeland, but especially the disappointment of the Reconstruction, when after the American Civil War, they thought that we were free now, and then it turned out that they were second-class citizens after all. And that was more or less a setting in which jazz began to develop, and it developed in an amazing half century of musical development, of which the only other example that exists, we're not talking about politics any longer, but the only other example that exists is European music in the period from Johann Sebastian Bach to Beethoven. There's nothing else that you can compare to the development of classical jazz from, the Hot Five of Louis Armstrong to Miles Davis and John Coltrane.
That's
I
that's
find that
that's
fascinating.
that's totally fascinating. It started in Congo Square in New Orleans and stuff, and it
Yeah,
must have been a pressure cooker of oppression and stuff. And then under these strict rules that the people could be in this one park and be able to play their African music, but then it more developed into this blues, jazz, kind of
Yeah,
depressing music with um, interesting undertones of what it's like living in a colonialist, post-colonialist, still
exactly.
colonialist
Yeah, yeah,
shithole. Yeah,
yeah. Anyway, but you can imagine that going back to Africa because you think, well, I'm black, so they must like me, etc. Didn't work at all because that. But anyway, that was just a note on the side. So humanity is still evolving, and the 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 idea of global governance was a very much stifling force on that development. The American culture, for all its great aspects, um, is not strong enough. Not apart from jazz, is not original enough to really serve as the cultural backbone of a world-embracing civilization. So other mental and cultural universes have to come in to bring out the real diversity of humanity today.
yeah. It seems like I'm not really sure that white Western people are capable of their own culture beyond consumerism and surviving harsh winters or whatever. I don't think that that was ever built into them leave it to people in the global South to actually visibly enjoy themselves in their cultures, culturally doing things that they enjoy rather than the
Yeah,
self-destructive tendencies, proclivities of the Westerners. So you've written extensively about the role of elite networks in crafting narratives. Now, this is a
yeah.
big deal with the media nowadays. So tell me, how do modern media ecosystems, whether corporate, social, or alternative that we have now, uh, serve as a tool still of manufacturing that consent?
Well, we live in the age of cancel culture now. So what I haven't experienced in earlier decades is that these days your argument is no longer considered valid in terms of being responded to, and that is new. Uh, I used to be in the 1970s in the Communist Party, and even in the mainstream liberal newspapers that we had in the Netherlands, for instance, it was the same, even more so in other countries like France and Italy. The communist position was discussed. I remember once in the early 70s that the head of the French employers organization used his annual speech to his, the fellow employers to attack really in depth the communist theory of so-called state monopoly capitalism. And I remember that we as communists were very proud and thought, wow, we're being taken serious. And the reason for that was nothing sentimental or liberal honor or whatever. It was simply that the employers in France, in this case, had to reckon with a powerful trade union, the CGT, which was communist led and based its action on this theory. So for the employers, it was important to come to grips with what they actually thought. And theory was, by the way, was faulty because it forgot about the possibility of capital to move over borders and set up shop elsewhere. But today we have a cancel culture. That means uh, people simply have to say you didn't believe in the COVID pandemic, then we don't have to uh, reckon with anything that you come up with. You're simply crossed out. Of course, that would not be possible if there was still a lively culture of public debate. Uh, because we've also seen that there are technologically driven developments in, for instance, the length of attention spans that's getting shorter and shorter. So, as people keep saying, young people can't listen for longer than 5 minutes to any argument because then they get bored or their minds drift off. My experience, by the way, is that that is not true at all because I see many young people in the student age these days who are eager to hear longer exposés and narratives in which more complex configurations of forces are being discussed. But there's no doubt that at first sight, attention spans are getting shorter, and a cancel culture plays into that because a cancel culture then allows you to say to yourself, yes, that's a discredited position, so let's not waste time and listen to this or that figure. So in that sense, something fundamental has changed, but like all change, it has not changed forever, and you can't say that um, there won't be a development in a totally different direction. So don't forget that in 1965 or 66, nobody ever could have predicted that in May 68, the youth of Western Europe, of the United States, and of many other parts of the world would revolt in an explosion of cultural innovation that we have not seen since the Second World War. So things can move very quickly and, in a non-linear way. Uh, that's the lesson of complexity theory, that complex events can take sudden turns into which entirely new worlds and new mental universes come into being before you know it. Um,
Yeah. And this
and that,
era,
that will happen again.
this last great era of political revolution, I don't think, has since the late 60s, early 70s, nothing has really filled that void since then. But
No.
it's a shame because it could, but the cancel culture is very pernicious in the sense that
Yeah,
it it's an ad hominem attack on anybody that labels them in order to not want to engage with their evidence, and
exactly.
and neoliberalism is using that as a tool, as a cudgel to beat people over the heads with, and
Yeah,
talk about Russian disinformation while spreading their own version of the truth. And it's a masterful act of psychological manipulation, and
yeah,
it's working. And coupled, like with you said, the decline in uh, the decline in IQ scores, the decline in literacy rates and stuff, we're poised to have a real great explosion of fascist mentality everywhere because people can't debate anymore. They're stuck
yeah.
in their ways, and neoliberals, they're just fascists who with rainbow flags. Let's be honest. You know,
Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
um, it's great to finally meet you. By the way,
Well, thanks.
so we talk of crisis a lot. Okay. So climate, migration, war, pandemics, microplastics. To what extent are these crises systemic byproducts of capitalism, in your opinion? And what extent do you think that they are strategically being managed?
Well, they're very different. For instance, when people say that the planet is heating up, that's very well possible if you think of simply the fact that we are coming out of an ice age. You know, we may have already passed a tipping point in which we're now moving to a colder climate, but that's a different thing. The way it's being used, in this case, the warming up of the planet, if it's warming up at all, by the way, but that's a different thing. Um, the way it's being used is simply to discipline people. So what we're looking at are what you sum up are examples of a politics of fear, because the capitalism that I grew up in after the Second World War was one organized around a class compromise. So for the workers, there was a realistic expectation that your children would live better lives than yourself, that there would be general social provision of all kinds, and so on and so forth. And of course, the capitalists had to pay for that, but for they it wasn't a free choice. But the trade unions came out very strong. The working class came out very strongly out of the Second World War, had to postpone consumption and so on and so forth. So in the 1950s and 60s, there was a powerful working class which forced capital to make concessions, and these concessions were the basis of the class compromise, in which a decent, more or less decent capitalism, for us at least, of course, not for people in Guatemala or Vietnam or Indonesia, but for the West itself, was realized. Today, such a class compromise is no longer possible because capitalism has degenerated into a speculation machine, which has not only created extreme inequalities of income, which are, you know, still spurting away in all kind of directions, but leaving behind millions of impoverished people everywhere. And in such a condition, um, the ability of a minority to govern a majority has to rely on other things than material concessions. And that has become the politics of fear. That was thought out by people like Philip Zelikow in the 1990s. He's in my view, the most um, interesting example of how the ruling class, or the organic intellectuals of the ruling class, have thought about the fact we can't offer the people anything material anymore. You know, better lives, better future, better education, social security, and so on. But we can frighten them. We can simply say, look, you may hate us, but we're the ones who can protect you from bomb throwing radicals of all kinds. And he developed a whole theory which began with Pearl Harbor as a an event that shaped the mental condition of an entire generation. And of course, he in the end became one of those who were remarkably well informed about the possibility of a 9/11 type of attack, and he also became the editor of the 9/11 official report, which was a complete whitewash operation. So Philip Zelikow is an interesting example of how the ruling class, through its organic intellectuals, so people who think for them, because the ruling class is not professionally engaged in thinking, engaged in ruling, but it needs, of course, intellectuals who can articulate the ruling class perspective on society and on everything that comes about. And the core concept is fear. There's this famous BBC documentary about the power of nightmares, and that is about
Is that Adam Curtis?
yeah, exactly.
A
Funnily
wonderful
enough,
filmmaker.
Adam Curtis apparently didn't realize that the COVID pandemic scam was itself a beautiful example of the power of nightmares. Because, like many others, especially certainly the old left, uh, they fell for the pandemic narrative. They all believed it. But anyway, the politics of fear, that's a new way of keeping the people disciplined and isolating those that don't agree,
Yeah.
and who are then subjected to the cancel culture that we talked about.
Yeah, I think that it works well. I do think that the economic or the environmental issues are real, but it's how they frame them is a political and strategic move in order to to control the people, works well. And I think you said it best. They have nothing left to offer you. And so the only thing that they can say is, well, what the alternative is we'll let, Muslims come and raid your
Yeah,
village and cut your head off and rape your family.
yeah.
Um,
By the way, don't mistake me that I think environmental pollution and deforestation and that sort of thing is very real.
mm,
As one of our physicists here has said, um, climate and temperatures and winds and whatever are determined by solar activity and magnetism between the planets and so on. But pollution is the work of humans, and I think that is very important. So if pollution should be at the top of the list when it comes to environmental issues, not but it's getting colder or more chaotic in the atmosphere.
mm.
Because that is
Um,
something that we simply should prepare for and accept that that's being decided by forces well beyond human interference. The ice ages didn't start or end because millions of years ago people started driving electric cars. So apparently other forces were at work.
well, agree to disagree. Your work implies that traditional democracy is largely ceremonial. I agree with you there. We are really in a spot where democracy is in name only. So, all the ways that are popular for resistance, what is still effective? I mean, we have so much going against us in order to mobilize. Like you said, the unions are gone. What are we supposed to do?
Yeah, well, um, one of the great events of our time is, of course, the information revolution. So, the fact that you and I were, I don't even, well, you were in North America, I guess, somewhere.
I'm in Germany.
Oh, yeah, yeah, you said so. But originally, you're from North America, I guess.
Yeah.
But the possibilities of communication, the possibilities of information gathering have so made such a quantum leap into a totally different universe. To find out something about any of the topics that I'm working on, I would normally have to sit for months in libraries, picking through all kind of boxes with paper. Now, an afternoon, if you organize it well and you prepare it well, you can become literate on a topic that you didn't know anything about at the start. Now, that is a process which is not just interesting for a handful of intellectuals, but it affects everybody. So of course, I earlier mentioned some um, trends that run against that, like the shortening of the attention span, the commercialization, the cancel culture, and so on. But still, there's going on, and the potential of that is only beginning to become apparent. And the potential is, on the one hand, a democratization of society. For instance, old ideas that you have people who are um, uh, elected in some public body can be recalled if they do things that they never were elected for. And there are many examples of that today. The information revolution would make it possible to follow your candidate, your elected representative, on a 24/7 basis, and to start revocation procedures early on. So there are some technical possibilities which are quite dramatic. Publicity. For instance, here in Holland, we had a very promising court case by two lawyers against the government, against Bill Gates, against a number of others who were involved in the COVID episode. And that one of these two lawyers was in the morning abducted by a police team at gunpoint, 5 o'clock in front of his wife and daughter. And he's now behind bars without being able to communicate with the outside world. It's still completely uncertain what he did, but it shows you that not only is democracy turned into a ceremonial facade of what it could have been, but the current state is beginning to behave in a fascist way. You know, fascism not no longer as effective, but really as a I call it postmodern fascism in the sense that no longer is the state acting through legions of brown shirts who attack workers in the streets, but the state is acting selectively, highly selectively. It picks out one person, in this case, one of these lawyers, and simply removes him from society. That was a technique that we thought of existed perhaps in dictatorships in Central America or the Middle East, but it is now here in traditionally liberal and tolerant Holland. So that postmodern fascism, I think, is something that's showing again that the ruling class is really at the end of its wits in the sense that it doesn't have a comprehensive program for which it can hope to win the consent of the population. Where, Gramsci made a famous distinction between ruling by consent and ruling by force, and in between there's a period in which the one is mutating into the other, and the powers that be are experimenting with what you can achieve legally, what you can do illegally, whether the population will respond. And here I think this idea of publicity and transparency comes in, because this lawyer that I just mentioned, who was abducted at gunpoint and kept behind bars incommunicado, is now surrounded by a mass of people, small mass of people. I have to, because you have to travel a lot to get to the place where he's being held, and they are demonstrating. Their small demonstration, a few hundred people, is being filmed. The film is being disseminated across all social media, and well, I can only say that it's a ray of hope, because he may be incommunicado on his part, but we know more about him than we otherwise would have known had he not been abducted by the government at gunpoint. So, in that sense, there are fractures in the existing in Germany. In Germany, you have Michael Ballweg, for instance, the organizer of Querdenken. The enormous demonstrations that were there at the beginning of the COVID period. And he is being held in, also in custody, uh, and being defended, but with a lot of publicity around his court cases, which is an endless litany of sessions of the Stuttgart court where he's being tried. So publicity in that sense, made possible in new ways by the information revolution, is something that we should think more about and try to exploit. Try to exploit, for instance, with humor. There's no point in trying to come up with all kind of complex theories that people will not easily take in, but trying to ridicule the rulers. And you know that we in Holland have as our prime minister now the head of the Secret Service, Dick Schoof. He was never a politician. He was not elected by anyone, but he was placed at the head of the government, and he's doing all these things that I just mentioned, like arresting this lawyer at gunpoint. So these are far-reaching developments which have the character of a seizure of power, and we should respond to that where it is possible, also with humor and with satire, ridiculing the basic impotence of these hired hands of the capitalist ruling class.
Uh, if I couldn't laugh, I think I'd go insane.
Yeah, well, I have the same. Yeah,
Well, they have a saying. It says, "I laugh to keep from crying." Um, all
yeah,
right.
exactly.
one, one one last question for you, and then we're going to let you off. Um, thank you again for doing this. It's been a real
No,
treat.
no, it's my pleasure.
If you were tasked with writing the obituary for the liberal international order, what would it say? And what do you hope is going to be born out of the ashes when it's all settled? What do you hope is going to be the new way the world works? Or will we get the chance?
Well, that's an important because the ashes. We shouldn't dwell too long on what the nature of the ashes might be if things really run out of hand. No, the liberal order had some very good things. Liberalism was a freedom movement of the rising bourgeoisie in the 17th, 18th century. And what the unique thing that happened was the fact that North America spoke English. When they asked Bismarck what was the most important, the Iron Chancellor of Germany, who brought about the unification of North Germany in 1871. When they asked him what was the most important geopolitical event in your lifetime, he thought a little and then said the fact that North America speaks English. And that, of course, has created a cultural heartland in which all kind of good things and less not so good things developed. But it also catapulted English into the lingua franca of the contemporary world. Look at what they're speaking in the European Union these days with 27 different nationalities. England stepping out of it, but yet English remains the language. Um, but liberalism as such, the idea of freedom of speech, the old English idea of habeas corpus, these are things that we should cherish. In the sense that all history is the taking further of what exists already into a new synthesis. And so, in that sense, it has an impressive past, even though liberalism has now degenerated into neoliberalism, which is the forceful imposition of an artificial, yeah, what I now call an ultra capitalism. It's a capitalism beyond its expiry date. And that is why there are so many features of it that resemble a sort of late state socialist experience, extremely harsh state power, regimentation in all kinds of areas of life. And that is because for the oligarchy, which is getting smaller and smaller and richer and richer, for the oligarchy, the idea that you have a lively, vital population is not an attractive idea, which is why they are organizing attacks on the population all the time. The lockdowns in the COVID period were attacks, making war preparation against Russia and China is an attack on the population. Uh, well, I can mention many other things that are testimony to the degradation of the original liberalism into yeah, stifled, uh, rigidified version of it, which is even no longer neoliberalism but ultra capitalism. It's a dictatorship of the oligarchy, which is dictatorship for the masses and remnants of the good life of the past for the oligarchy. But then
Mm.
for them, it's not fun anymore either because they have to build underground shelters of all kinds and stock up beans.
Well, that's kind of fun. You can see how that might be enjoyable. Play in the doomsday bunker with your rich friends and stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, apparently it's the best we can do. Maybe they have intelligence that tells them something we don't know, like it's all going to be over soon, or there's a comet hurtling towards Earth. They have intel that we don't have, and we're left to fight over the crumbs. And neoliberalism now it's fascism wrapped in a rainbow flag, and it comes at you with so the entire society is laden with double speak, where we say we care about human rights and we care
yeah,
about these
yeah,
people and that people, but in
yeah.
reality things are getting worse for Black people, for everybody domestically, working class people, and then the people abroad as well. It's like, how can you stand for gay rights, but then be wearing all clothing that was made at gunpoint by a Vietnamese family, or your T-shirts are made in Haiti, most of them.
Yeah.
Um,
Even that is paradise compared to what is happening to the Palestinians in
yeah,
Gaza. You know. Uh,
which is a whole nother show, I think,
yeah, yeah,
because
yeah. I'm
oh
afraid so.
Jesus.
I'm afraid so.
And the pervasiveness of technology, actually, you were hopeful that allowed us to see that happening, and otherwise we would have never known. And a lot of people just woke up and they said there's conflict in Israel, let me look up the history, and then they found out shortly that, oh, it's very lopsided, you know
Yeah, yeah,
so well, thanks for coming on. You come back and do it again. What do you say?
yeah. That's fine.
Professor Kees van der Pijl, I hope I said that right. I'm not Dutch, but i'm,
Well, you're
I'm
close by.
German.
Yeah.
I'm close by, so that's good enough. Next time you can try to take a whack at my name. It's even more unpronounceable. Chris Jeffries. Stick around. I want to talk to you about jazz. We'll wave to everybody. See you guys later. Thanks for coming.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me.